third view, and the view that's going to be the focus of our presentation today, is the view that credence is a species of belief, and belief is more fundamental. So actually, Kenny Eastwarn has a recent paper where he's kind of been sympathetic to a version of this view, and then on certain interpretations, Holton and Harman are kind of sympathetic, but honestly, not a lot of people have defended this view. I think it's relatively unpopular, and like I said earlier, a lot of people kind of give one or two quick objections to it and then sort of dismiss it, and so we want to be like, no, don't do that, not so fast. So, credence first, dualism, and belief first are sort of three main views on the relationship between belief and credence, but they don't necessarily exhaust the possibilities. So another possibility is you're just an eliminativist. So you don't think that credence reduces to belief or belief reduces to credence, but you just think one of them just doesn't exist. So I think some people are like eliminativists about belief. They think belief's just kind of a leftover from folk psychology, and credence is really all there is. Eliminativists about credence are a little harder to track down.
Maybe Holton.
Maybe Holton, but he thinks there's partial belief, so it kind of also depends on what you think is required to believe in credence. But anyway, so eliminativism is another view that we're going to kind of bracket. Another view, and some of you guys might be familiar with this, but Sarah Moss has a book that just came out called Probabilistic Knowledge. So her view is a little different. It doesn't quite fit into this threefold characterization, because on her view, so she agrees with the belief first view that we have a simple attitude and a complex content. So like on the belief first view, credences are like beliefs and probabilities or epistemic modals, and on her view she agrees there's a simple attitude and a complex content, but she explicitly rejects the belief first view we're going to defend today, and part of the reason for that is she thinks that the content of these doxastic attitude is not a proposition but a probability space. And actually some of the stuff that came up in your talk could come up here too. But because of that, her view it's hard to put into this threefold categorization because I think all three of these views are assuming that the objects of these attitudes are propositional. So we might talk about her a little bit more later, but we're pretty much going to set her view aside. It has some interesting things in common with the belief first view, but also departs from the belief first view in some important ways. And so basically, we're going to assume two things then. One, that eliminativism is not true about belief or credence, but that both attitudes exist. And two, that the belief and credence are propositional attitudes. So we're going to assume those two things. So, like I said, the belief first view is often taken to be subject to strong objections and dismissed quickly. So basically our thesis, or what we may argue for, is that a belief first view of the relationship between belief and credence is more plausible than many people have thought. Okay, so that's kind of some introduction, some stage setting. Now I'm going to move on to section 2, where I'm going to kind of explain this view and explain how it gets around one objection that Christensen makes. So on our belief first view, this is basically the view. So for S to have X degree of credence, that P, where P is a proposition, is just for S to believe MP, where M picks out an epistemic modal, and X and M correspond to each other. So let me give some examples. A high credence, it will rain, is the belief with the content, it is likely that it will rain. A moderately high credence that will rain is a belief with the content, it's somewhat likely it will rain. A low credence that it will rain is a belief with the content, it's unlikely it will rain. I mean, for example, to have some credence it will rain is to believe it might rain, and to have zero credence it will rain is to believe, for example, it definitely won't rain or rain is impossible. So these credences can but need not be precise. Actually, a lot of the examples I just gave are examples where it's imprecise, but you could also form a belief in a precise probability. So 50% chance of rain tomorrow, I could have a 0.5 credence it will rain, which is the belief it is 0.5 likely that it will rain, or the probability it will rain tomorrow is 0.5. And so what's important to this view is that the content of the belief determines the degree of credence, and so part of what the view posits is that there's a simple attitude and kind of the numerical complexity is in the content of what's believed. Okay, so that's our basic belief first view. Belief first entails a coextensivity, wait, coextensive claim, claim about two things that are coextensive. So, sorry, language is hard. So that's the claim that S has X degree of credence, that P, if and only if S believes in P. So that's different because belief first is a claim about what it is to have a credence or the nature of credence, reducing credence to modal belief, and this claim just says credence and modal belief are coextensive. And we want to distinguish these two because some of the arguments that Andrew's going to talk about are only going to be arguments for biconditional, as we have it on your handout, not for belief first. But we think that if biconditional is true, this at least lends quite a bit of support to belief first. It makes belief first quite likely. And so a lot of the arguments for biconditional, at least indirectly, will support belief first. Okay, good. So now I want to talk about how this view sort of lends a response to an objection that Christensen makes. And so Christensen says, look, let's suppose credences are these probability beliefs or these modal beliefs. Well, he basically just considers the probability belief version. So let's suppose they're probability beliefs. He says, what's the relevant interpretation or meaning of probability in the content of these beliefs? And he says, well, it's not subjective probability, because then credences would just be beliefs about credences, which would be just like beliefs about your own mental states, and that's weird. That doesn't seem like what we're going for. And he also thinks it's not frequency, because then whenever you have a credence, you'd have to kind of appeal to some reference class, at least implicitly. And it doesn't seem like we do that even implicitly when forming credences. So we agree it's not subjective probability or frequency, and what we want to suggest is that the relevant type of probability is epistemic probability. And so epistemic probability is a relation between, I guess, a probability function in your evidence, and so P is probable for S, even if and only if it's supported by S's evidence or by what S knows, and P is possible for S if and only if it's not ruled out by or it's inconsistent with S's evidence or what S knows. So we think that the type of probability in these beliefs is epistemic probability, and sometimes they won't even be beliefs about probability specifically, but they'll just be modal beliefs more generally. And we think that's kind of the most promising way to kind of get around Christensen's worry. So I guess on your handout I also have a definition of modal beliefs. So these are about beliefs about epistemic probability or possibility. And I mean, we kind of talked about this already. One has a modal belief that P when one believes MP, where M picks out an epistemic modal or epistemic probability. Cool. Okay, so before we move on to some arguments for this belief first view, I wanted to talk a little bit about epistemic modals and kind of a debate within, a debate about what epistemic modals pick out. So there's two main views here. So an epistemic modal is a belief, or like, an epistemic modal is like, probably it will rain tomorrow, or it might rain tomorrow, or there's a good chance it'll rain tomorrow. I guess sentences with some kind of epistemic modifier that we didn't really put a definition. They're similar, like they would be sentences with the same content as modal beliefs. So there's two main views about what these epistemic modals are. There's descriptivism and there's creedal expressivism. And so on a descriptivist view, a sentence like, it will probably rain tomorrow, expresses a proposition, and it's true or false. So if I say Fred is probably happy, that expresses a proposition that's true or false, namely the proposition that Fred is probably happy. One, I guess, worry for this view is like, what are the truth conditions of this proposition? And because answering that can be tricky, some people have kind of preferred a second view. It's called creedal expressivism. And so on a creedal expressivist view, sentences like, it will probably rain tomorrow, or Fred is probably happy, they do not express propositions, and they're not true or false. So one way to think about this is it's kind of similar to like expressivism about morality, or about moral sentences. So epistemic modals express some kind of attitude the speaker has towards the embedded proposition. So like the embedded proposition would be Fred is happy, embedded with the probably. And so like on one version of this view, when I say Fred is probably happy, what I'm actually communicating is advice to have a moderately high credence that Fred is happy. That's one version of the view. But generally, on a expressivist view, these modals are not propositional, but they're going to express some attitude that the speaker has towards the embedded proposition. So, however, if creedal expressivism is true, then for us to have a modal belief would not be for us to believe a proposition. It would just be for us to have a degree of credence that P. And because we want to say that credences are beliefs in propositions with modal content, we're going to assume that descriptivism is true for the sake of this talk. I think this is actually a pretty live debate in the phil language about epistemic modals, and unfortunately we just can't defend everything. So that's just going to be another thing we just kind of assume. If creedal expressivism is true, it rules out at least the kind of belief first view that we want to defend because, like I said, credences are beliefs with propositional content. And in many ways similar to our non-modal beliefs. So Fred is happy, Fred is probably happy. We want to say those are both expressing propositions that can be true or false. Should I mention the content thing?
Which content?
So another thing, I guess, maybe that would, I don't know if this is helpful or not, but on the epistemic modal thing, there's like kind of 3 views you might take about what the content of an epistemic modal is. Oh. So someone like Seth Yalchin.
Oh, I'll be covering this later.
You'll cover this later? Oh.
Yeah, in response to the objection.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So I don't say it.
Yeah, about the types of descriptivism, right?
Well, I'll just say it.
Okay, go ahead.
Sorry.
Go ahead,
Okay,
yeah.
so Yalchin is an Yalcin, sorry. Oh yeah, he's at Berkeley, right? Yeah. He's an expressivist, so when he thinks, I say Fred is probably happy, the content of that is that Fred is happy. Moss thinks the content of that is not a proposition at all, but it's actually a probability space, and Fred is happy is true in most of the partitions of that space. And we think the content is just a proposition, namely the proposition that Fred is probably happy. So I don't know if that was helpful at all. That was a thing that kind of setting out the views out there and hopefully giving a little more clarity on how our view compares to some of the people that we disagree with, maybe just by assumption. But yeah. So now I'm going to turn it over to Andrew, and he's going to talk about a case for belief first and cover an objection. So.
All right. Thanks so much, Liz.
Yeah.
I also want to thank Ed for organizing this conference and everybody else who played a role. I've been having a fun time, and it's been good to get to know some of you, and I hope I can get to know some of you a little more before the end of this conference. Liz plugged one of my papers. I also want to. She has a forthcoming paper in philosophical studies, on why the belief-credence relation is important, and how it does it. It informs 5 different debates in epistemology. So I just want to throw out there, remember her name, because you'll probably see more papers from her about belief and credence coming out. So thanks, Liz, for setting up a lot of the hard stuff. Now I'm going to give some of the arguments for belief first, and I feel good about that because I actually believe this view, not like her. So I feel confident doing this. Somewhat confident. Okay, so this is a prima facie case. We're just giving some reasons to accept it. None of them actually alone are supposed to do all the work. In some cases, you could take this like a cumulative case. Be like, hey, look at all these good things that belief first explains, and at the end of this, you should be like, oh yeah, I could really like this view. I'm hoping some of you feel that way, and of course, a successful defense will require responding to the best objections to belief first. So we're just going to respond, as Liz said, to the biggest one. Okay. So there's 7 of them? Yeah, there's 7 of them. How's our time? We got about 20 minutes?
We've gone about 20 minutes,
okay,
right?
So,
yeah, okay.
Okay, so you did your half, I'll do my half. Okay. So the belief first view is very simple. Okay. Belief first can, obviously, this is on the handout, it can account for beliefs, the belief that P. It can account for numerically precise credences. So when you have a belief in a probability with a precise content, like the belief that probability P is 0.9, but it could also deal with vague and fuzzy credences, just when you believe that P is generally likely or moderately likely. I'll expand on that in a little bit. And even comparative confidences. So being more confident that P than Q could just be believing that P is more likely than Q. Okay. Now, so it's simple. You got belief, and that's all you really need. And all this degreed stuff, you throw it in the content. That's what I want to do. I think it's a very simple picture. Now, this actually isn't a reason to prefer this view over the credence first view. The credence first view is also pretty simple. You just have this nice spectrumed, credence, right? And then you just kind of slap on belief on top of it. A belief is, a credence meeting a certain threshold. So that's view is very simple too. So I don't think this is a reason to accept belief first over credence first. It is a reason that counts it in favor over dualism, her view. Dualism, where she needs kind of two attitudes doing these different things where neither is more fundamental. So yeah, it's a reason, not a knockdown reason, but it's a reason in our first reason. Okay, number 2, functional profile. So we want to say that credences have at least a lot of the same functional profile. Like it does a lot of same things that modal beliefs do. It does a lot of things, plays a lot of the same roles. We're likely to describe them in the same sort of situations. When do people ascribe credences? When people are engaging in statistical reasoning, they're reasoning about probabilities and statistics. So when they're engaging in Bayesian reasoning and decision theory, when you're putting your little numbers into Bayes' theorem, or when you have when you're calculating your expected utility, you're throwing in your numbers. Now, I think modal beliefs can play that same role. You have beliefs about probabilities, and you're putting the number of the probability into the equation. So I think when people are engaging in any of these sorts of reasoning, we could just as well, that's using credences, we could also ascribe to those same people beliefs and probabilities. Yeah. Okay, and one thing is, I think that in a lot, this is in response to some of the dualists, like Liz and others, that a lot of the cases where they want to say credences are doing their work, like Liz mentioned that some of the dualists want to say, we move to credences when the stakes get high and we're more reflective. At first I said, oh, Rachel's in the office. Just flat out belief, just Rachel's in the office. No probability really attached. But later when the police come in, you go, oh, okay, I'm pretty sure she was in the office. I'm not completely sure. That's when you start getting more specific and you start appealing to credences. And hey, those are those exact same places where we start appealing to modal beliefs. Right? We go, oh yeah, there's a belief, right? I believe I'm pretty sure, or it's very likely that Rachel was in the office, but it's not certain that she is. So yeah, so that's our second reason, that in a lot of the places where credences are supposed to be doing work, beliefs and modal beliefs could be doing the exact same work. All right, number 3, creedal degrees of precision. So I think belief first, this has already been mentioned a couple times, but I'm just using it as a reason for belief first. Belief first can explain how degrees of confidence can vary in their degrees of precision. So this has come up a few times. Imagine the cases where it is intuitive that somebody has a precise credence or a fuzzy credence, or, okay. Well, now think about those cases. So think of a case, now I'll go on the flip side. Suppose Grace believes that P is very likely. Now notice when you believe that P is very likely, you believe a content, but the content doesn't attribute a numerically precise or sharp probability. An analogy is, if you believe somebody's tall, you don't believe that you don't have a numerically precise height. You don't believe they're 6'2". You might just believe that they're tall. It's kind of imprecise. Okay? And I think our beliefs and probabilities can be like that. And I think in those cases, those are the cases where it's intuitive that somebody has a fuzzy credence. When somebody just believes, oh, that's likely. They also have moderately high credence. And those are also the cases where we don't want to attribute a precise degree of confidence. But suppose let's make the credence even more, make the interval even more, wide. Somebody might merely believe, Grace might merely believe that P is possible. Right? There's some possibility that P is, so that's a modal belief. Then I would just say, in that case, she has some confidence that P. It's a non-zero confidence, but we're not going to, it's just much wider. It could be anywhere like non-zero to 1. And but yeah, it still allows for precise credences. When Grace flips her coin and she believes that the coin will fall heads, well, is that when she believes that's a 0.5 probability, that's also where it seems like she has a credence of 0.5 that the coin will land heads. All right, so that's credo degrees of precision. Number 4. I hope you're feeling moved, convinced. No, okay, I see a lot of shaking heads. That's too bad. All right, introspection. So I think introspection, belief first explains how we can know our credences by way of introspection. It's too bad Hugh Miller is not here because he really likes introspection. But I mean, from yesterday,
He
it
just
seemed like he
introspects
did.
all the time.
Yeah. So somehow we know what our credences are by introspection, I think. And I think that belief first can explain this. Because generally, I think we know the contents of our beliefs. I know the content of my belief that the world is round. I just kind of, okay, I have the belief that the world is round. You know, I don't have to go do an empirical experiment. Like, oh yeah, the content of my belief the world is round. I can also know the content of my belief that, you know, probably the government will have some corruption. Okay, I believe that probably the government will have some corruption. And then I go, okay, and hey, I'm also pretty confident that the government will have some corruption. Now, what explains that reasoning that I just went from, oh, I believe it's pretty confident, it's pretty probable that the government will have some corruption. I believe that. So I'm pretty confident that it'll have some that it'll have some corruption. How do I make that inference? Well, biconditional explains it, right? Because you can, it's a valid inference. There's this coextensive link connecting beliefs and probabilities with, our degrees of credence, and we can do all that by introspection. Okay. Yeah, all right. So I'm kind of moving to the second part of under introspection. And we can, no, I guess I covered that. All right. So let's go to the next one. It's connected to the introspection one. Seemingly inconsistent sentences. Okay. You know, I've never heard people appeal to these. I've never heard people appeal to these sentences in formal epistemology, but in other areas of philosophy, it's really popular to do this. You give a sentence and say, "Hey, doesn't that sound really bad in your ears?" So think of this sentence like, "I am very confident that it's going to rain, but I don't believe it's at all likely that it's going to rain." That should be like, and then that's why we put that number sign by. It's like, I believe it's very likely that it's going to rain, but I'm not at all confident that it's going to rain. You go, like you should feel this like tension, this feeling of inconsistency. Okay, why? We have an explanation because of biconditional, right? The first conjunct entails the denial of the latter conjunct, and vice versa. Okay. Right. Now, some of you might have thought, there's something suspicious going on with these, the Morean claims, like P, but I don't believe it's P. Everybody knows those aren't actually inconsistent. But, I mean, we can make these third person, too. So, like, Liz is very confident that it'll rain, but Liz doesn't believe it's very likely that it'll rain. Yeah, sounds bad. Or Liz believes it's very likely that it'll rain, but she's not confident that it's going to rain. Right? That also sounds bad. These bad-sounding sentences are some reason to accept biconditional or belief first. Now, don't get us wrong here. We're not like, it's not like, there's all these sentences, therefore our view is true. That I do see some people doing that in other areas of philosophy. We want to say something like this. Suppose belief first or biconditional is true. Then we would expect these sentences to sound bad. And hey, they do sound bad. So that gives us some support for biconditional or belief first. So that's more how we're reasoning. I'm aware that sometimes these sentences can sound bad for pragmatic or Gracian reasons. Okay, that's number 5. Number 6, we're flying by. Okay, betting behavior and probabilistic reasoning. So I was going to say people used to think that one's degree of belief is just the odds you're willing to bet on P, and then I found out yesterday from Ed that nobody actually ever held that view. Okay, so according to a certain lore or tradition or folklore or something, that is what people thought. Now, nobody really holds that now, but I think everybody would agree that our betting behavior is a decent indication, a decent measurement, a decent sign of how confident you are in your belief. Okay, and I think belief first also explains that. Okay, because normally when we're betting, when we're making a bet, we're betting on probabilities, right? In real life bets, we go, okay, what's the likelihood that my sports team is going to win this game? And so we're reasoning, okay, this is probably likely. Okay, I'll bet lots of odds on it, and that's supposed to indicate that you're very confident in that P. Okay, and our belief first view explains that because, well, that's what you do when you believe that P is very likely. All right, and biconditional and belief first also shows how we can make inferences using a probability calculus. All right, I want to make sure I don't say stuff I don't really mean. Let's see. Oh, okay, yeah. So just in general, when we're reasoning with the probability calculus, it's not just like we have credences and we're just kind of combining them and then other credences come out. Like what we do, this was kind of explained a little bit before, is we put in numbers. We put in the probabilities that we think that these propositions are likely. And we reason from that. So, I'm wondering what the probability of P and Q is when I know they're mutually exclusive. And I know that, well, I believe that P is moderately probably true, so I give it like 0.75. Q is even more likely true. I just give it a slap on a number, 0.9. I multiply them because I'm trying to get a conjunction. I get, let's see, what's that? That's 0.675 when you multiply those two numbers. And then I get, oh, okay, so I should be a little bit less confident that P and Q is true. Okay, and so belief first explains how we do all this reasoning, okay, and how we can do all this reasoning, which is what's really doing the work is the probabilities and our beliefs about them. Okay, and there we go. There's our belief first view. Okay, that's number 6. Okay, number 7.
Wait, can I add something to that really quick?
Oh yeah. There's another thing that you told me to add that I forgot, which is that. Actually, you just say it.
So I think there's psychological evidence that a lot of time when we're reasoning about making inferences with the probability calculus, for example, we're doing something that looks a lot more like using probabilistic beliefs and then reasoning like with the probabilities in the content, rather than credences where the content is just P, for example. So, like Andrew's example, P is 0.75, Q is 0.9, so P and Q is 0.675. And Holton talks about this more, so that we don't necessarily have time to go into all the details of the psychology behind it. But there's actually been, like Julia Staffel's dissertation was actually on what would it look like to reason with credences that aren't probabilistic beliefs? And that's kind of like a puzzle, I think, that some epistemologists have been interested in. So I think there's at least some good psychological evidence that a lot of times when we reason using the probability calculus, we're reasoning using probability beliefs, not credences. So anyway.
I think you put that way better than I would.
No, what? Not at all.
So I'm glad that you did it.
No.
She's come such a long. She was my undergrad so long ago. It's like our dream for all of our undergrads. Yeah. So check out the Holton paper. What is it? Intention as a model for belief. Mm-hmm. That's the paper.
Intention as a model for belief.
Yeah.
And Julia Staffel has a paper called "Can There Be Reasoning with Degrees of Belief," which also I think is relevant. So. Yeah.
Cool. Great.
Yep.
And right. Yeah, and Holton actually has that empirical evidence about that. Okay, last, credences in knowledge. So Liz mentioned Moss's new book out, and one of the things she kind of pushes, and she pushes this in a Phil review paper in 2013, that it's a little bit odd how formal epistemologists don't seem to care at all about knowledge. Sometimes it's even a little bit disparaging about knowledge. Now, Moss has her own way of working things out, but she thinks, well, wouldn't it be cool if credences could be knowledge, or could have like knowledge-like status? It could have things that a lot of people think are required for knowledge, like safety, sensitivity, factivity, all those wonderful
Be Gettiard,
Gettiard, non-accidentally true, and because those are all really nice things. And so Moss has her own way. It's very complex, but it's kind of a beautiful theory that at the end I can't accept, but not just because it's not my view, but but our view has a really easy way of seeing how credence could be count as knowledge, which is, well, if credence is just our belief in probabilities, then it just has to be well, we have just ordinary beliefs, and that they can be knowledge in the same way that any other belief is an instance of knowledge. So, so let's say I have a credence that P of 0.5. Well, on our view, that's just belief that P is 0.5 probable, right? And what would it be for that credence to be knowledge? Well, just knowing that P is 0.5 probable, right? So you can get all those cool things that traditional epistemologists care about. Isn't that what you want? That's what I want. All right. So anyway, yeah, my background is mainly traditional epistemology. I'm a little more new to formal epistemology, so I have a lot to learn, to be honest. Okay. Last, we'll take on what we think is the best objection to the belief first. There are a number that have been given by Christensen, we mentioned, Mark Kaplan, not David Kaplan, Mark Kaplan, Julie Staffel, Sarah Moss. But the biggest one we think is most challenging, and we've gotten like just in personal conversations, is Keith Frankish's in his book Mind and Supermind, and the idea is that this theory of credence makes credence overly sophisticated. So the objection goes like this from Frankish: children and animals have credences even if they don't have modal beliefs. Okay, that's the idea. Like these, young children, they can have varying degrees of confidence, but they don't have belief in probabilities. Okay, now what do we have to say about that? Well, rejoinder 1 to the reply.
Wait.
Oh no! I should get to the reply before I get to the rejoinder. Yeah. So our first reply is: we think that young children can have modal beliefs. Now, this won't have to be that sophisticated. This is on the next page. A relatively young child could believe that mommy is probably away, or mommy might be over there, right? That's all you need for a modal belief, right? Just the might, or the could, or the probably. Okay, maybe. She might put, oh yeah, mommy couldn't be over there, right? So I'm not really sure why Frankish thinks that young children couldn't have those beliefs. Now, they won't be like sophisticated statistical probabilities, but on our belief first theory, you don't need all that. Okay, so that's what helped us get by Christensen's earlier objection.
Wait, can I say one thing really quick?
Sure.
I think too, part of it's because they're not necessarily thinking that the probability is epistemic, or they're not like allowing general epistemic modals that aren't beliefs about like probability per se. And so I think it's more plausible that a young child could have a belief like mommy's probably in the kitchen, or sorry, that was sexist.
Could be.
Mommy could. Sorry. But
Liz. Oh,
sorry.
Why I never. Sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
But like the probability that mom is in the kitchen is 0.95. That seems like a much more difficult belief to form. Yeah. So I think in a way, because we're kind of expanding what can be put in the content of these things. That helps with the objection. Sorry.
Right. No, that's great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And I do think, for example, believing mommy probably might be over there versus like mommy might be over there, right? I mean, you might even think the might or could is even more simple than the probably. I have that feeling. Yeah, okay, good. Thank you for the nods. I really love the nods, especially when I'm teaching, like when the students give you nods, it feels so good. All right, so let's keep going to the next point. Seth Yeltsin has this fun example where he's sitting at a table and his dog Fido comes up, and Fido's waiting there, and then Fido says to his dinner guest, "Oh, Fido thinks I might give him a bone." Okay. And Yeltsin thinks, look, there's nothing at all counter to, that's not like a weird way of talking. And so it's just very natural to say Fido thinks I might give him a bone. And that would be ascribing a modal belief to Fido, right? All right. So there's our reply. Yeltsin, you're wrong about what you say about the little children and the animals. Okay. Now there's a rejoinder to the reply. Suppose descriptivism is true. So on descriptivism, remember modal claims, epistemic modals are propositional, right? And on some of the more well-known theories, like to believe it might be that P is just for all I know P, right? Or it's consistent with what I know of P. Now here's something Yeltsin Yeltsin himself says about his own example, which is, well, Fido couldn't believe that because it requires, according to descriptivism, higher order epistemic concepts, like for all I know of P, right? And I don't think that, well, actually I'll just read, I had the quote from Yeltsin. Yeltsin says, quote, "But what exactly am I saying? Does my remark in part mean, as standard versions of descriptivism would recommend, that Fido believes that it is left open by what he knows that I will give him a bone? This is a bit much. The truth of that sentence does not turn on recherche facts about canine self-awareness. Surely that sentence may be true, even if Fido is incapable of such second-order states of mind." Okay, so I kind of borrowed from Yeltsin, but then that dragged along another objection. Okay, so reply to rejoinder 1. We wanted to distinguish between two types of descriptivism, complex and simple. So complex descriptivism says descriptivism is true, and S believes that MP only if S has the concept of M, where having the concept of M requires having these other second-order epistemic concepts, versus simple descriptivism. Descriptivism is true, and S believes that MP only if S has the concept of M, where having the concept of M does not require having second-order epistemic concepts. Okay, and basically what we want to do is we are committed to descriptivism. We committed that at the very beginning. In the longer version of the paper we described, you need that for belief first to really be belief first. So we kind of back off and say we're just going to have to reject complex descriptivism. Okay, you don't have to have all the components of the concept, I guess, what the concept is analyzed into in order to grasp the concept. Now, that's not too strange. So think about this. Suppose the best analysis of knowledge went something like, S knows that P if and only if S has an ungetty or justified true belief. Okay, suppose that's right. Now, a little child can know that, I'll use Daddy. Daddy knows that knows that I stole the toy or something like that. But the little child doesn't need, Daddy has a justified true ungetty belief that I stole the toy, right? The child doesn't need that, even though that might be what knowledge is analyzed as. And Jennifer Nagle has some interesting psychological research. I think that we get the concept of knowledge really early. It's some evidence for a knowledge first view. Okay, so similarly, we might still agree that modal claims must be analyzed in terms of second-order epistemic concepts, but that doesn't mean you need to grasp those second-order concepts in order to grasp something like might. Okay, all Fido or the child needs is to be able to grasp might. Okay. All right, so that's our reply to rejoinder 1. Okay, here's reply 2 to the initial reply. So I tried to indent these to make it easier. I don't know if it actually made it easier. But, okay, so Frankish might be like, all right. Some young kids and some animals might be able to have these modal beliefs, but just go even more primitive. Okay, so get the kid when he or she is an infant, or even a very young infant, like 3 months. I don't know when kids start having beliefs. Or take maybe the dog has beliefs and modal beliefs, but what about that worm? Or what's his name? Peter Crothers, in his book Architecture of the Mind, he argues that bees have beliefs and desires, and they just kind of got guided by beliefs and desires as they're moving toward the hive. Yeah. So what about them? Don't they have, they don't have beliefs and probabilities. Oh, there's a beliefs and probabilities. There's a typo. Rejoinder 2 should say, simple creatures with beliefs without modal beliefs will have credences. So delete that not. That's a typo there. Otherwise, it wouldn't be a problem for us. Because if you look at the reply, I say it's not clear that such creatures have credences, which is what the thing said without the typo correction. Okay, so what we want to say is, I just said, it's not clear that such creatures have credences. I'm going to run out of breath by the time I'm done. Okay, so we think if you make a creature that simple, like the bee, it's just, there's nectar, I believe, it's over there. There's the hive. They're just going on very simple belief combined with desire combinations. Now at that point, I might just say, we might just say, well, they don't have credences then. There's nothing fine-grained in their set of doxastic states. It's just an on-off thing. Oh, nectar, they eat it, or I don't know what they do with the nectar, but yeah, does that make sense? Yeah, okay, good. I think y'all got the idea. Okay, so here's the overall point of how we'll respond to this general type of objection. Overall point. We're going to say either the children, animals, beings, creatures, whatever, involved are complex enough to have both credences and modal beliefs, like the older child, or they're so simple that their actions can be explained by simple basic belief-desire pairs without credence being involved at all. So in either case, there's no clear counterexample. Yeah, let's see. Did I have any other remarks on that? Nope. Are we out of time?
You might want to think about kind of concluding.
Yeah,
Oh.
I think we're out of time.
Okay. In conclusion, belief first views are more plausible than many have previously supposed. Thanks.
Thank you.
Alright, okay, we are going to go straight to the questions as we have only run a little bit. So Emma, do you want to kick us off, and everyone else, can you keep your hands up, please?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
So I just have a question about sort of decision theory. So in some cases, if you're at the train station, you've got to decide whether to go to platform 10 or platform 11, and you end up going to platform 11, trying to catch a train somewhere. And the decision theorist who believes in credences, even if you don't have any sort of apparent beliefs of the form, the probability that my train goes from platform 11 is 0.42.
Whatever, yeah.
Still, we can explain why you do it, because we say you've got those credences.
Yeah.
What would you say in those cases? So I guess perhaps you'd say we have the belief that it's more likely to go from 11 to 12, but what would the decision theory be? It sort of feels like you'll need lots of different things, because sometimes we have beliefs that things have particular probabilities, and sometimes we have beliefs that one thing's more likely than another, and how would it work? Would it...
You want to go first, or you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, I think one response is to say even if you don't have a belief about a specific probability, you still have a belief like this is the most likely platform for me to get my train. I mean, you could even, it could be in some sense also an implicit belief that I don't know if to have it. I mean, it depends on your theory of belief and what you think it takes to have a belief, but I don't know if you always have to explicitly form the belief, but it could be a more implicit thing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, if we're just trying to explain the behavior, and if they have the belief that P is more likely than Q, then that's all we're going to say. They're more confident that P than Q, and that explains their behavior. I might be missing something with the decision theory.
Well, it's just when you've got credences and everything, then there's just sort of one. You could just say maximize expected utility. That's what people are doing the whole time.
Yeah.
But sometimes people have beliefs in probabilities. Sometimes they just believe one thing's more likely. Sometimes they think something might be the case. I mean, how is it all? It's going to be more complicated. Yeah. But it's fine.
And I might say that, and this is some very different, makes our project different from some of the other projects. We're not trying to do anything with ideal agents, or we're not just trying to give a model. We're just actually giving a theory of actual humans as confidences, and we might say, oh, in this case, that's what's going on. With decision theory, I'm not sure how that would, if what the decision theorist is wanting to do is similar to what we're trying to do.
I guess it depends on, I think there's multiple uses for decision theory, and one is to explain behavior of actual humans, and another is to kind of give a normative theory about how we ought to act. And I think one worry for the first version is that there are serious predictable ways that we fail to maximize expected value. You know what I mean? And so part of, I think, the answer to your question is going to depend on what you see the function of decision theory being. But I think that is a case we could put in the paper and think about more, because it does seem like there are cases where we want to appeal to some kind of credence you have to explain your behavior. Even if we do think there are other cases where you're acting irrationally or decision theory can't capture what you're doing. So yeah, I think it's a good case, and we might. I think maybe our best response would be to appeal to a more simplistic modal belief that you have. But yeah, that's helpful.
Cool. So let me just check that I've got everyone. I think I've got most names, but do correct me if I make a mistake. So we've got Richard, Ori, Dorothy, Ed, Jason, Russell, Daniel, Jessica, and sorry, check with the back. Sorry? Mark, and Mark. Did I miss anyone off there? Okay, so there's quite a lot of questions to get through, so if we could maybe restrict follow-ups and as far as possible, that'd be greatly appreciated. So, Richard, please.
Okay, so I'd just like to develop Christensen's objection a bit more. It seems to me that your view faces a basic dilemma. I mean, when you look at the biconditional, you either treat the probability on the right-hand side as just the same as the probability on the left-hand side, which you don't, which you've already said you don't want to do. You don't want the epistemic modal there to be just picking out credences, because then, or it's something distinct. And so that's the side I'd be taking. But if it's something distinct, if this epistemic probability is something distinct from the credences, then it's something that you can be unsure about. You can be unsure about whether the evidence supports P, or you can be unsure or whether it in fact supports M. And if you can be unsure about it, then there are going to be the cases where you attach some degree of belief to the possibility that it supports one side, and some degree of belief that it's the other, and your overall probability is going to be bang in the middle. But neither of these epistemic probabilities are ones that you actually believe. Or degrees of belief are going to be an average of them.
Yeah.
So that biconditional is just not going to be true.
So in your case, when the person believes, oh, P is somewhat probable, Q is somewhat probable, or not P is somewhat probable, I mean, such a person would also probably believe, well, that person could have some confidence in P, some confidence in not P.
Yeah, so take rain, not rain. Okay, so there's some evidence supporting rain. So they believe that. They believe that, they believe there's some probability that rain.
Yeah.
There's also some probability that not rain. So their degree of belief is actually bang in the middle, because they're averaging over these two possibilities. But actually they have degree of belief 0 that the probability is bang in the middle, that the epistemic probability is bang in the middle.
Wait.
Because the evidence doesn't support it being in the middle. The evidence might support it being rain, it might support it being not rain.
Did you just switch to their view about the probability, or?
So the basic claim here is that if epistemic probability is something distinct from degree of belief, then it's something that an agent can be unsure about. If it's something that they're unsure about, then their overall degree of belief in some proposition is just going to be the average of their degrees of belief in the various epistemic probabilities, possible epistemic probabilities. So could be the case that it's probable that it's rain, could be the case that it's probable it's not rain. I don't know which it is, so I'm down the middle.
Right.
But there's no possibility. It's very, I have very low degree of belief that its epistemic probability is 1/2.
I see. Yeah, I'll have to think about that. Do you have a quick?
So I just want to clarify. Are you thinking of a case where we have a credence that has a epistemic modal as its content?
Yeah,
is that okay? Okay.
Your MP here. So I'm asking, what is the interpretation of that? I mean, so sort of suppose your answer was, I think that's the chances on the right hand side. That's not what you said. I just sort of fix it in that. So I might think, well, I have some degree of belief that the chance is 0. I have some degree of belief that the chance is 1. I think both of these chances are equally likely, so my degree of belief is 1/2.
Yeah.
But I have absolutely no belief in the chance being 1/2.
In such a case, wouldn't you believe that, given your overall evidence, that it's about as likely as not? I mean, you have some evidence for P, some evidence for not P. Wouldn't you say your overall evidence would be it's about 0.5?
We do actually have a follow-up on this from Jason, so maybe...
I was just going to offer another case in this vein.
Okay.
So there's some theorem that I'm thinking about. Here's something I believe. Either it's certainly true, or it's certainly false.
Right.
Where either it's maximally supported by my evidence, it entails it, or it entails its negation, let's say.
Right.
But I'm, just a little more confident than not that the theorem's true.
Yeah.
No, this is helpful. And maybe I don't know if this is going to answer your question, but I think that we can have beliefs simultaneously have a belief about an epistemic probability and an objective probability. This reminds me of a case maybe you gave earlier when we were discussing this. But
objective.
Yeah. So I could believe Goldbach's conjecture is objectively the probability is either 1 or 0, but nonetheless, because of my limited epistemic situation, the epistemic probability is 0.5 or whatever.
I mean, I guess.
So,
but just to put this back in Richard's and I'll stop talking.
Sure.
I mean, I was trying to push a reading
Yeah.
where that was epistemic
Yeah,
probability.
right.
It's either, if my evidence entails it,
Yeah,
it maximally supports it.
yeah.
I take it that that's the kind of reading that you have in mind. If it entails its negation, it
Yeah.
maximally disconfirms it. And so exactly the reading you want is exactly the reading you can get these split credences about the probability being super high, super low, not in the middle, but then your degree of confidence falling right in the middle, where you know the epistemic probability is not.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'll have to, that's a good one. Or thank you for
this is helpful, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think my off-the-cuff instinct is to say that your evidence actually doesn't support that
Right.
it's 0 or 1 because you are in a limited epistemic situation. You know that the objective probability is 0 or 1, but
Yeah.
the epistemic probability would come. But I think this is a case that we both want to think more about. So.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll let it go. Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay. Sorry, Russell. Did you have a follow-up as well?
This was actually just going to be my hand.
Oh, okay.
Um,
Nice. Good.
But in general, there are these worries about what you mean by epistemic
Yeah.
probability.
Maybe that's it. Maybe we need to clarify what we mean by that's helpful.
Yeah.
But it
well,
doesn't,
Yeah, my view on this actually is also that, so this is one, like what we gave is one theory of epistemic probability. We're supposed to be able to grasp epistemic probability independently of the definition, just by considering cases, when you're like wondering, you're doing a math problem and you're wondering, okay, how likely is it that I got this right? And objectively it's either 1 or 0, but it seems there's some sense of probability in which it makes certain good sense. And then one way to analyze that is in terms of how good your evidence is. But we're not sure if that has to be the only way.
So maybe what we need to do is just have a little more on what epistemic probability is and try to be more clear there, and maybe that could help clear up some of these worries. Contrast it with beliefs about objective probabilities, for example.
Yeah.
So.
Was there more of that?
But so you wanted to avoid credence on this, though, right? You didn't want this to turn out to be.
That's right. Otherwise, it'd be circular.
Yeah,
Well, it would just be
right?
beliefs about your own mental states, and that's not what credences are, right?
Yeah, we definitely don't want that one.
Yeah.
And that would be a bad theory of epistemic probability too, I think.
So Ed has another follow-up on this?
Yes, and my hand's also replaces my hand. So I always took it that this version of understanding what Christensen was saying was not the real argument. And there are two separable things here that you don't want to conflate. So one is the one that Richard was pushing, and that's just like define it however you like. If it's something objective, it's something that's independent of my mental state, I can be unsure of it, and then I can believe that it's either this or this without being in the middle, but my credence is going to be in the middle. That's one problem. There's then a separate problem, which I heard there was a little bit of conflation there, and that's just what do you mean by epistemic probability? So, my best account of what epistemic probability is for me, I think it's something like, well, it's the probabilities that the credences that an ideally rational agent with my evidence would have. Now, I think that's the best account that we've got. I don't think anything even comes close to being as good as that. But you can't do that because that requires a sort of credence first kind of view. So you need to give me an all. But now these are two separate problems, and those together, those are the Christensen problems, and they're the real ones to worry about more than anything else.
That helps clarify for me. Yeah.
I don't know. I feel like what you're saying goes beyond what Christensen had.
I think they're both there. They're not so clearly distinguished, but they're both there.
In the you're thinking the 2004 putting logic in its place.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So if you have a theory of epistemic probability that requires it to depend on credence in some way, then that would make our analysis circular. That's right. And so that's we should make that clear that that's
We want to
something
avoid that,
we want to rule out as part of a good theory of epistemic probability. That would make us have to argue against you, which we don't necessarily want to make enemies, but I guess we're already there.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, this is just this isn't an argument or anything, but there's other people in the literature that have actually suggested a similar response to Christensen, like Sturgeon. So maybe he has some stuff that could help with this too that we could look at. That, like I said, not an argument, but other people have thought this might be at least there's something to this, but I think maybe you guys are convincing me it's underdeveloped. So yeah.
Mark?
I thought you weren't more focused ahead of me.
Sorry? No, it's all right. I'm mixing up the order.
So this is on the over-sophistication objection. So I took it that your response to that was that in order to have credences, the beliefs do not seem to be that sophisticated at all in children, so even just grasping simple epistemic modals like might, that's right. For children to have credences. So I was wondering how that fits. So there are certain situations where you might want to attribute more sophisticated credences to young children. So the kinds of cases I have in mind are the stuff in developmental psychology on causal reasoning, so work like people like Alison Gopnik, where you are attributing really quite sophisticated credences to children, where they take numerically precise values, they engage in very sophisticated forms of probabilistic inference, usually want to show that it's Bayes optimal reasoning that the children are engaging in. The credence functions are often quite unique, a fair amount of mathematical apparatus just even describe the shape of the credence functions. Okay.
This all seems to be supportive so far.
Well, this is all quite sophisticated. So there's worries that you're putting kind of quite sophisticated stuff inside the content of the belief. Oh. So if you want to put all of that into the content of the belief, so it's numerically precise, and you require some sophisticated analytic tools to describe the shape of the credence function. Yeah. To describe
I see what you're saying.
The epistemic support which has been offered by the evidence. Yeah. That's also really quite hard to do, and it's even for external agents, it requires quite a sophisticated description. So if the thought is that children are engaged in probabilistic inference in these cases, they do have credences, but if you just attribute them very, very simple credences based on might conditionals, you can't capture the forms of reasoning that they're engaged in when they're engaged with these causal forms of causal reasoning.
Yeah, so I have a stab at this. Maybe you have this makes us take more time because we both give responses, but my thought on that is, so it might be that also our project might be different from what the projects of some other people here, because I'm actually interested in when people actually have degrees of confidence in something. Okay, and now it might be that children are doing all of these things, but they have no idea that they're doing it, that there's these probabilistic mechanisms going on. And I might actually say they don't have credences in those cases, in some sense, in this more ordinary degrees of confidence sense. I mean, they might have any idea what's going on in their systems, but then I would say, well, those are subpersonal systems, right? They're not really credences of the agent. That's my quick response.
So people do make claims in this area about the subpersonal systems.
That's what I thought you were saying, yeah.
But not everyone does that.
I see.
In many of these cases, they actually want to describe it's the agent who has these credences. So the child believes that, flicking the switch will turn the light on, and they believe it to this certain degree, and then they have the distribution of over a bunch. So they do actually there are people who want to run it as a personal level story.
Okay, that's helpful.
Could you repeat what the reference was, just in case I...
But there's tons of work on children as kind of sophisticated probabilistic reasoners.
Okay.
Yeah, I would probably push on the personal subpersonal, but I see that there is a response to that.
Yeah.
Cool. So even with overrunning a little bit, we've only got about 15 minutes and 5 questions, so it's about 3 minutes a question, so we might have to keep it pretty rapid. So Jessica?
Yeah.
Hey!
So I just wanted to ask, I know this depends a little bit on what you end up going with for epistemic probability, but I'm wondering if you're committed to people's being committed to their own rationality. Because, I might know very well that I'm paranoid and tend to have false beliefs when I'm in a bad mood, et cetera, and so I feel very confident that my neighbor has it out for me, but at the same time, I don't believe that that's what my evidence supports.
Right. I like that case. I'll have to. So, okay, so you're confident that your neighbor has it out for you, but you also know your tendencies and you believe that it's unlikely. Right. Okay. Yeah. So you're pretty confident.
Which is something I feel like I experience daily.
With your neighbor? Or in other areas. Yeah, okay. One thing, or you wanna?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I think it is psychologically possible, although almost for sure irrational, to both believe P and P, like, believe P and believe, you know, P is unlikely, or P is likely and not P or something. Yeah. The question is, like, I mean, I think this could butt up against some of the stuff about epistemic probabilities, though, because I kind of be in, like, this weird you're of two minds, and, like, in some situations, like, it feels like your evidence supports one, and in some situations it feels like your evidence supports the other. But I think this is going to be kind of lumped into, like you said, what we end up wanting to say about epistemic probabilities here. But I do think, yeah, you can, like, in the same way that I think a lot of people, like, in traditional epistemology, think you can psychologically believe P and believe not P, maybe you can't put them together, I don't know. You could also plausibly believe P is unlikely and P at the same time.
And then on our view, you would be both confident that P and unconfident that P. And then you would be in just this mixed up mindset. But it seems like that's what you are. That sounds bad. That's what you would be and what we would all be when we're in that situation.
Oren? Yes, so I think this basically on the same theme of, you know, how do you understand epistemic probability, but just one very small detail that I think is important. I mean, on the handout you say P is probable for S if and only if P is supported by S's evidence, and I think that's a standard view. That matches what people think of epistemic probability things. But then now a minute ago you said something like, you know, if S takes P to be supported by her evidence.
Yeah.
And I think given that you want to, you know, you're not thinking of ideal rational agents, but agents like us, I think that makes more sense probably. But I'm not sure if that's how people actually use the term epistemic probability.
Yeah.
But like other philosophers?
Isn't epistemic probability supposed to be, you know, what your evidence actually supports? Rather than
well, this is getting back to kind of what I think maybe what Ed was saying about how epistemic probability is the credences an ideally rational agent with my evidence would have. So,
sure, yeah.
So I think, yeah, I mean, one thing we could think about is whether we want it to be what is actually supported by someone's evidence or what someone takes to be supported by her evidence.
No, well, this is the definition of epistemic probability. Our theory of confidence or credence is that it's belief in the epistemic probability, right?
Oh, right, yeah.
And that's how that's why you're appealing to belief in probability in response to Jessica.
Right, yeah.
But if you want to explain how actual people's degrees of credences, right, then it has to be connected then to epistemic probability in this more subjective sense, surely.
Why?
I mean, I take it that.
One clarification: they don't have to believe the conjuncts of the analysis every time they consider the conjunct. Just like whenever I think about someone knowing something, I don't always think they have a justified, true, ungoodyear belief.
So it's like.
Wait. So what role exactly is epistemic probability playing in your version of belief first?
Yeah. So your confidence that P is just your belief that P is probable. Or your degree of confidence is your, so if you're confident that P, then you believe that P is probable.
Okay, so then it's, the degree to which you believe it to be supported by
that's right.
Yeah.
Which is then, right, okay, I see. So there's no...
But I think there is a step going from, I believe it's probable, and then I believe P is supported by my evidence. And that's on this theory of evidence, if that theory, it's just like, I believe that Fred knows P, therefore P is true. Right, there is an extra step, but there might be other analyses of epistemic probability, like the one that Ed just mentioned. I'm actually wanting to rule, because I'm not an evidentialist, I think, so I might even say, like, I might want to analyze epistemic probability, like P is probable for S, just in case, like, P is, like, belief-worthy of S, and understand that in an externalist way or something. That's where I lean, but anyway.
Am I allowed to?
Maybe to get through the questions, we're going to have to move on. Sorry. Dorothy?
Well, I think it's probably been covered, but I'm very confused about what the content of these belief that it is probable that blah, blah, blah is. I understand it perfectly if it was, because or what the truth conditions of it is probable that, or it might
I'm not sure what they are either.
Right.
Yep, me neither.
It's a proposition, right? You
Yeah.
insist it's a proposition. And I'd understand if it was objective chance. I'd understand, but it isn't, of your view. I'd understand if it was just another way of saying that I have a high credence. And I must say I was reading you that way to begin with, but I take it you don't like that either. So you're committed to a third thing.
Yeah.
Which you put in terms of my evidence supporting. So it's true if and only if my evidence does support. I do have some hesitation about, whether that is really, how much can be said about that. But also, I'll just say at the end, one way of reading my evidence supports, common in the literature, is my evidence shoves it up. Not that it's high, but that this makes it higher than it was. It's evidence for it rather than against it, which is compatible with it being pretty low. So I'm just very confused about what the content of the.
I see.
But to buy your view, you have to believe in a kind of probability that is not credence and is not objective probability. And
I think we grasp it. Yeah, I think we grasp it in ordinary examples when. When we say, oh yeah, okay, that math problem is probably the right answer, and now we're definitely not meaning, or it's probably wrong. So okay, I don't think we're meaning objective probability in the math case. Now we could mean subjective probability, but sometimes we will make claims like, okay, that's the probable answer, and we're talking not. I'm not just talking about everybody's credence. I'm not just telling them that's what my credence is. I'm saying this is what's probable. I'm telling the group, and that seems to be something in between objective and subjective.
Because you wouldn't say, no, that's not actually what your credence is.
Right.
You would give evidence against that being the correct answer. So it's not a claim about your mental states.
It's,
so it is in a sense an objective.
Yeah, it is in a sense objective.
But of course it can be probable on my evidence and improbable on your evidence.
That's right.
Part of what I think you're bringing up is some of the reasons that people move from descriptivism about epistemic modals to creedal expressivism. And not to, just kick this objection away, but we kind of wanted to more assume descriptivism, and it could be something we could try to defend a little bit more in the longer version of the paper, but I think at this point we were kind of both saying we don't know if we can fully solve this problem for the truth conditions for epistemic modals. It's definitely a problem, and that's one reason people have gone in for creedal expressivism. So fair. Yeah.
Fair enough.
Daniel? I wanted to suggest a possible fix for this problem about...
We have a friend.
Yay, friends!
You're going to like this. Here's the suggested modification. So have it so that instead of it being a belief that the epistemic probability is such and such, have it be a belief that the best estimate of the epistemic probability is such and such. That's not a credence. That's still a thing. So in like the Pascal's, the Goldbach's injectory case, you can say, well, look, I know that in some sense the epistemic probability is 0 or 1. But
you're fixing that, yeah.
But my best estimate of it is 0.5, maybe, or something else. And that's still, you can still have this as a belief.
Yeah.
There's an expressivist version of this where you're recommending that estimate. And that's not creedal expressivism, but it's a kind of expressivism. And maybe, I would prefer that view, but if you don't like expressivist views, you can have it as a descriptivist view, that you're just saying this is the best estimate. And I think that will fix at least that problem.
Yeah.
It may be open another category.
Well, the problem it opens up is an over-sophistication objection, I think. But I do like how you're kind of pointing in the direction of how we might want to respond to what Ed and Richard and others have said. So I think we do want to go in that direction. I think that one, I don't want to say I want to say a child can have degrees of confidence but not believe the best estimate of where mom is, but Yeah, thank you. Thank you for
We
that.
could have a disjunctive claim. Maybe that's too crazy.
That's when
Oh, then we
philosophy
lose
goes
the
bad.
simple one.
Yeah.
Oh man, so
It's
we're
not
bumping
as-
up the rug in other places. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe we
Yeah.
should go to your view.
Yeah, dualism.
Come on, last one, Jason. Oh, we should probably. We've only got a relatively short.
Yeah, we can
I
chat
agree.
about this.
All right then.
Thank you for the
Yeah,
feedback.
thanks so much,
That was
everyone.
really helpful.